Derek Reynolds tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his eyes flickering toward the neatly wrapped gift bag resting on the passenger seat. Inside, a delicate bracelet shimmered, meant for his daughter, Kira. She would turn 9 tomorrow, and he could already picture her joy when she opened it. The thought alone made the exhaustion of his overtime shift at the factory melt away. The sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the quiet streets of Westfield, Indiana, in a golden glow. The hum of his engine was steady, the road ahead peaceful, until a sudden flash of red and blue lights shattered the calm. His chest tightened. The wail of a siren sliced through the air. His pulse quickened. He wasn't speeding. His taillights were intact. His tags were current. So why was he being pulled over? Instinct took over. He eased to a stop at the side of the road, rolling down his window as the officer approached. A middle-aged white man with a stern expression, hand resting on his belt. Derek kept his hands visible, his voice steady. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" The officer barely acknowledged the greeting, his eyes sweeping over Derek before barking, "License and registration." Derek complied, his fingers steady as he handed over the documents. The officer studied him, his scrutiny lingering, as if searching for something unseen. "Where are you headed?" The question came sharp, almost accusatory. Derek hesitated. "Just heading home, sir. Picking up a gift for my daughter." The officer's lips curled slightly, though there was no warmth in the gesture. "Step out of the car." A simple order. But in that moment, Derek knew this was no routine traffic stop. His heart pounded against his ribs. His mind raced. Slowly, cautiously, he pushed the door open, stepping out into the cool evening air, hands visible at his sides. He glanced at the officer, searching for a clue in his expression. Nothing but rigid authority stared back. "Stand over there," the officer commanded, motioning toward the curb. Derek obeyed, his breath steady, his body tense. Shadows shifted behind drawn curtains. Neighbors peeked through their blinds. A quiet street now held silent witnesses. The officer moved to the car, his flashlight sweeping over the interior. Then, he reached in and pulled out the gift bag. Derek's jaw clenched. The officer's fingers tore through the delicate wrapping, unraveling the bow, exposing the bracelet meant for Kira. A gift turned into evidence of what, exactly? "What's going on, officer?" Derek's voice remained calm, but his patience thinned. "I wasn't speeding. Everything's in order." The officer turned, his eyes narrowing. "You look suspicious. We've had reports of break-ins around here." Derek inhaled sharply. Those words. He had heard them before, in stories, in headlines, in warnings passed down. The same script. Different players. "With all due respect, sir, I've done nothing wrong," he said evenly. The officer ignored him, tossing the gift bag aside and slamming the car door shut. Derek felt the weight of a dozen eyes on him. Phones were up now, recording. A small crowd gathered, murmurs threading through the tension-thick air. "Is this necessary?" Derek asked, louder this time. "Keep quiet," the officer snapped, pointing a finger at him. "Let me do my job." But his job had turned into something else entirely. The unease in the crowd deepened, shifting into something heavier. Anger. Concern. A young woman with her phone raised spoke first. "This is wrong. He's not doing anything." The officer whipped around, barking, "Stay back." More voices joined in. More phones pointed in his direction. The officer turned back to Derek, tension rolling off him like a storm cloud. His hand hovered near his hip, fingers brushing against his holster. Derek's stomach clenched. He lifted his hands slightly, palms out, a gesture of submission that felt both humiliating and necessary. "Don't move," the officer warned, though Derek hadn't taken a step. The murmurs swelled into open protest. A woman gestured wildly, a man's voice rang out, "This doesn't look right." Then, a voice cut through the chaos, clear, unwavering. "Officer, I know this man." Heads turned. A woman stepped forward from the crowd, her presence quiet but commanding. Dressed in a cardigan and jeans, her work badge still clipped at her hip. Miss Linda Palmer. A local teacher. Respected. Known. The officer stiffened. "Ma'am, stay back." I'm not interfering, she replied, stopping just a few feet away. I just want to make it clear, this man, Derek Reynolds, is a parent of one of my students. He's not a threat. He's a good man. The officer's grip on control wavered. The crowd murmured in agreement, voices rising in unity. He's done nothing wrong, a man shouted. We're all watching, a woman added. Miss Palmer's gaze never wavered. If there's no evidence of a crime, I think it's time to let him go. The street held its breath, waiting for the officer's next move. She stood firm, her voice unwavering. You have no grounds for this. Let him go. Derek felt a wave of gratitude wash over him, but he kept his expression neutral, his voice steady. Thank you, Miss Palmer. But the officer wasn't done. His pride was on the line, his authority hanging by a thread. He scanned the gathering crowd, feeling the weight of their stares. His jaw clenched, his grip tightening as frustration warred with doubt. He turned back to them, his voice sharper now, but not as strong as before. Step back, ma'am, or I'll have to detain you for interfering with police work. The crowd erupted. Voices clashed in outrage. Detain her? For what? Someone shouted. This is harassment, another added. Miss Palmer didn't so much as blink. I'm not interfering, she said, her tone calm but firm. I'm a witness. And so is everyone else here. She gestured to the swelling crowd, neighbors stepping out of their homes, drawn by the commotion. More eyes. More cameras. More people who would remember this moment. The officer's hand twitched near his radio. His options were slipping away. He glanced at Derek, as if searching for a reason to continue. A justification. But Derek remained still, hands raised, his resolve unshaken. I've done everything you asked, he said, his voice clear. You searched my car. You checked my license. What more do you need? The silence that followed was heavy. The kind of silence that demanded an answer the officer couldn't give. His gaze flickered to the crowd, to the countless phones recording him. His hesitation stretched, the tension thickening. Finally, his shoulders deflated slightly. With a sharp exhale, he took a step back. You're free to go, he muttered, his voice barely audible over the murmuring crowd. Then, without another word, he turned, his stride brisk as he made his way back to his patrol car. His shoulders were stiff, his pride bruised. But he was retreating. The moment didn't dissolve immediately. The energy in the air was still charged. Derek let his hands drop slowly, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Miss Palmer turned to him, her gaze searching. Are you okay? Derek nodded, his voice steady but layered with emotion. I will be. Thanks to you. A wave of applause rippled through the crowd. Some shouted words of support. Encouragement. Derek stood there, absorbing it, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over him. Relief mingled with disbelief. But the night wasn't over. What had unfolded here would not be forgotten. The ripples had already begun. As the officer's car disappeared down the street, the crowd's energy shifted. Voices rose, some in anger, others in disbelief. Neighbors exchanged knowing glances, shared frustrations surfacing in passionate discussions. This wasn't just about Derek. It never had been. This was about all of them. Miss Palmer remained beside him, her presence unwavering. You shouldn't have had to go through that, she murmured, her voice thick with quiet rage and sorrow. Derek's hands trembled slightly as he reached into his car, retrieving the discarded gift bag. I'm just glad Kyra wasn't here to see it, he admitted. I don't want her growing up thinking this is normal. A young man in the crowd stepped forward, his phone raised. I got everything on video, he said. People need to see this. A chorus of agreement followed. Some neighbors exchanged numbers, determined to turn this moment into something bigger. The conversation shifted, police accountability, systemic issues, the need for action. Miss Palmer's voice cut through the noise, steady and resolute. We can't just post a video and move on. We need to do more. This community deserves better. Derek deserves better. Nods of agreement rippled through the group. Derek looked around, seeing not just neighbors, but allies. Strangers who had stepped forward when it mattered most. A swell of gratitude mixed with frustration. Why did it take this much? Why did it take a crowd, a camera, a bold witness to keep him safe? As people began to drift back to their homes, Derek turned to Miss Palmer. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." She smiled, soft but certain. "We look out for each other, Derek. That's what a community is for." But the true impact of that night wouldn't be clear until the days and weeks that followed.